Yes, Mr. Kinnear. Now, the next witness.
May I call Barbara Matthews?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mrs. Matthews. You're going to make the affirmation, I believe?
Yes.
Right, well then would you please read the words on the screen in front of you?
Yes. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Good. Thank you very much. Sit down, please. Make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
You've got a bottle of water. Have you got a glass?
Yes.
Oh, good. I couldn't see it, that's all. Right. Thank you. When you're ready then, Mr.
Thanks, sir. Would you please confirm your name for the record?
Barbara Matthews.
Good afternoon, Miss Matthews. Thank you very much for attending today. Before we start in earnest on your evidence, there are 3 points which I should put to you. First of all, if any time you require a break, please say so. That's not a problem. Secondly, if at any time any of my questions is unclear, please say so and I'll rephrase them so that they become clear.
Yes.
And thirdly and finally, would you please keep your voice up during the course of your evidence? That's so the shorthand writer can capture everything you say accurately.
Of course.
Now, Ms Matthews, you provided 2 statements for this inquiry. The first dated the 22nd of August 2019, which can be found at TMO 100499987. Is that it?
It is, yes.
And your second statement is dated the 8th of December 2020, which can be found at TMO 00873380. And is that it?
Yes, it is.
Have you read both of those statements recently?
I have.
And are their contents true?
They are true.
And are you content to have those statements stand as your evidence to this inquiry?
I am.
Thank you. Now, the first topic I'd like to ask you questions about is your background, qualifications and experience. Is it right that you were employed by the TMO as Executive Director of Financial Services and ICT from June 2015 onwards?
It is correct.
And when did you stop being employed by the TMO?
I stopped being employed by the TMO when the TMO transferred its services to the council in February 2018, and then I was employed by the council, RBKC.
Did you, at the time of your appointment, have any formal health and safety management qualifications?
No.
Did you have any form of health and safety training? Had you received any previously?
None but the normal sort of office health and safety training that you often get in a new role.
When you were appointed as Executive Director at the TMO, first of all, were you aware of fires in the United Kingdom involving cladding on high-rise residential buildings?
At the time I joined, no, I wasn't.
Were you aware of the Lacknell House fire in 2009?
I was, yes.
And in broad terms, what did you know about it?
My understanding there, the issue was to do with compartmentation and the design of the building, and that one of the reasons for the deaths of people was they were trapped in a room that they thought was safe and it wasn't.
So you were unaware of the role of cladding in that fire?
I was aware, when you talk about cladding, I was aware that some of the under windows there are cladding panels which may have had an impact on the fire, but cladding as a whole I was not aware of.
And were you aware of the recommendations that had been made by the coroner following the Lacknell House inquests?
In relation to compartmentation and the panels that I mentioned, they've got a name, but I can't remember what they're called. I was aware of the recommendation with regards to design on buildings.
Thank you. Now, in paragraph 7 of your first witness statement, we don't need to go to it, but the reference is TMO 100499987/2, and the third sentence you say this: one of my key functions was to monitor the TMO's health and safety performance from a strategic level. That is, it was my role to ensure that the TMO had a health and safety strategy in place that was up to date and that identified programs of work training. Now, before you joined the TMO, had you held any previous responsibility for health and safety in any previous role?
No.
Did you have any training or experience in the management of health and safety at this point?
No.
Had you ever been responsible for the health and safety of housing stock, such as that managed by the TMO, i.e. 10,000 homes, some council tenanted, leasehold, sheltered housing, etc.?
No.
What experience did you have before joining the TMO of fire safety management in the context of social housing?
I hadn't actually managed fire safety, but obviously through the number of years that I've been in housing, I'm aware of the requirements in terms of fire risk assessments, the actions arising from those, and sort of issues around compartmentation in buildings. So I was aware of these things, but I didn't actually manage them myself.
Now, you may have been aware of them. Had you received any specific fire safety training in your previous roles?
No.
Had you received any particular training on fire risk systems or fire risk management systems?
No.
Did you have any training on fire safety in the context of asset management or housing stock whilst employed by the TMO?
No.
Did you have any training, whether at the TMO or previously, on the requirements of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005?
No.
Were you aware of any of the supporting guidance? First of all, Her Majesty's Government Fire Safety Risk Assessment Sleeping Accommodation, which had been published by the Department for Communities and Local Government.
I'm likely to have been aware of it in previous executive roles, but I can't specifically say that I had been through the whole document.
Was it a document that you had cause to refer to during your time at the TMO?
Not me specifically. I would have expected Janice, my health and safety manager, to review that document and bring any things to my attention. She was the expert.
Now, we'll come on to Ms. Ray in due course, but looking at what you yourself did, were you aware of the Lay Corps' guidance on fire safety provisions for certain types of existing housing, published in 2008?
I'm not sure that I was.
The Local Government Association's publication, Fire Safety in Purpose-Built Blocks of Flats, published in 2011.
I was aware of that document.
Were you aware of its substance?
I had read that document.
And had you read it before you joined the TMO?
Not before, no.
And what prompted you to read it whilst you were employed by the TMO?
I think Janice would have brought it to my attention when we were having various discussions about things. I can't actually remember.
If you can't remember, then
I can't remember.
Don't try and remember.
No.
Were you aware of the requirements of the responsible person under the fire safety order?
I was at the TMO through the work I did with Janice.
But not before?
Not before.
Were you given any specific training on the requirements of and the role of fire risk assessments?
No.
Now, you go on to say in paragraph 8 of your statement this, and again, maybe easier to have it up on the screen, TMO 1004997/2. You say this: my role in relation to health and safety at the TMO was managerial rather than technical. It was my responsibility to ensure that Janice Ray had the proper support and resources to be able to carry out her role. I provided this support to Janice through formal one-to-one meetings every month, during which we discussed issues, service plans, and anything else that was topical or an issue. We would also identify what health and safety matters we felt needed to be included in the fortnightly executive team meetings and the annual health and safety report presented to the executive team and the board. We also caught up weekly on a more informal basis. Now, you say in relation to health and safety, your role in relation to health and safety was managerial rather than technical. Did you have any technical experience for the role?
No, not really. I mean, as it says there, I was not the technical side. That was Janice. I was more managerial, looking at the strategic role.
Now, would it be fair to say that your responsibility was broad in that it encompassed ensuring the health and safety of all TMO residents, employees and contractors, etc.?
Yes.
Now, given your lack of technical ability, did you rely entirely on Janice Ray to determine whether the TMO was acting as it should in relation to its health and safety obligations?
I obviously relied on Janice, but also in terms of fire safety, that I relied on Carl Stokes as well.
Did you understand that the property portfolio over which you had executive health and safety responsibility was of a substantial size, encompassing some 650 blocks?
Yes, I was.
Did you understand that oversight of health and safety for the TMO required a substantial level of leadership and organisational control?
Yes.
Now, Janice Ray was not part of the senior management team at the TMO, is that right?
That's correct.
She wasn't required to attend senior management team meetings, for example. Again, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. But in effect, given that you were her line manager, she was effectively at a senior management level. Is that a fair characterisation?
That is a fair assessment of her role.
And certainly from the practical point of view.
Yes.
Now, you state in paragraph 8 of your witness statement, the one we've just looked at, that you and Janice Ray would identify the matters that needed to be included in executive team meetings and the annual health and safety report. How did you determine what needed to be reported to the executive team?
Well, a number of things would come up at the Health and Safety Committee, and Janice and I followed up on various issues, and some things would come to my attention through different means. Sometimes it was a matter of what was coming up in the sector, various sort of general publications that came through email, so we might decide there's a matter in there that ought to come to the executive team because it might be applicable to the TMO and its stock.
What type of issues, first of all, who would determine what health and safety issues were to be referred to the board?
What was referred to the board would have been the things that were shown in the annual health and safety report, and also exceptional items. For instance, after the fire at Adair, there were various reports that went to the board on that, and the resulting enforcement notices.
Were there any instances where Janice Ray recommended that a health and safety issue should be referred to the board, but you disagreed with her?
No.
Were there any issues that you thought should be referred to the board and Janice Ray asked you not to?
I don't think she ever asked me not to report something to the board.
Or at least encouraged you not to put it before the
No,
board?
she never did that.
Now, staying in this witness statement at paragraph 9, you say this, and I quote, "The TMO had a health and safety committee that met regularly. While I chaired these meetings, I made it clear to all those in attendance that Janice was the manager and the expert. My attendance at these meetings was to highlight the importance that the TMO put on health and safety. Sasha Jevons also attended, as many matters concerning health and safety fell into her directorate." Was the practical result of your lack of technical knowledge that you deferred to Janice Ray as the expert on all aspects of health and safety, including fire safety?
As I said, yes, but with fire safety, it was also Carl Stokes.
Is it fair to say that your role as chair was essentially procedural, i.e. to run the meeting?
It wasn't just to run the meeting, because as you can see from my statements, that one of the things that I did was to stress and challenge and require people in the organisation to do certain things. So it wasn't just to sit there and chair the meeting.
So your contention would be it was a substantive as opposed to a mere presentational role?
Yes.
Can you help us? What health and safety matters fell into Sasha Jevons' directorate?
They would have been the actions resulting from any of the health and safety action plans in relation to maybe contract management or maybe planned maintenance, even key documentation required that would come from the Keystone system. So those were the sorts of things that fell into her area.
Thank you, Ms Matthews. Now, I want to move now onto a new topic, which is oversight of fire safety. Now, can we look, first of all, at the TMO's regulatory responsibilities in relation to fire safety? First of all, were you aware of the substance of the regulatory reform fire safety order?
I probably was aware of some of it, but maybe not all the detail.
Put differently, had you sat down and read the order?
I hadn't read it front to back, no.
Had you ever read any aspects of the order?
I believe I did in relation to fire risk assessments, the need for fire risk assessments and what they needed to cover.
And what had prompted that investigation?
Probably my own knowledge, to build up my knowledge, because I was responsible for health and safety. I needed to read things to ensure I understood certain things, and fire risk assessments was one of the things that I was quite concerned about.
And was that concern, did that emerge at the start of your tenure as Executive Director, or did it come later once issues regarding FRAs, for example, started to be discussed by the executive team?
No, it came fairly early on when I realised that there were a huge amount of actions outstanding from fire risk assessments.
Were you aware of the concept and the substance of the duties imposed upon the responsible person under the order?
I'm not sure that I was, to be honest.
Again, looking at it differently, did you consider the TMO to be the responsible person in relation to Grenfell Tower?
No, I believe that there were two responsible people, because the actual building is owned by the council, and we're the manager. TMO was the managing agent. So I felt that effectively there were two responsible people.
Now, can we look at some of the substantive requirements of the fire safety order? And for that purpose, could I ask you to go to INQ 000 11 327/8. Now, this is part 2 of the fire safety order, and if I could ask you to look at Article 8 under the heading Duty to take general fire precautions, and it provides as follows: the responsible person must take such general fire precautions as will ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the safety of any of his employees, and B, in relation to relevant persons who are not his employees, take such general fire precautions as may reasonably be required in the circumstances of the case to ensure that the premises are safe. First of all, were you aware of that duty?
I was, yes.
Were you aware of the TMO's arrangements to discharge that duty?
I was aware of some of the things, in particular, as I've mentioned, fire risk assessments, and some of the checks that were going on in some of the buildings in relation to various, I think you refer to them as fire systems.
So we can see that risk assessment is a separate duty under Article 9, just below. Can you give the panel an idea of the gist of the understanding of the checks that you are thinking of when you were looking at Article 8?
I suppose I was thinking of the sort of inspections that occur of equipment in various buildings.
How had you satisfied yourself that the arrangements for performing this duty imposed under Article 8 were adequate?
Again, I would rely on the information I was getting about health and safety, as I said, fire risk assessments, and the various audits that Janice's team undertook, various audits. So I would get my reassurance from that.
Did you exercise any independent review of your own to satisfy yourself regarding the adequacy of the arrangements?
No, I didn't.
Please say if this is unfair or not, but would it be fair to say that if Janice Ray didn't give you any cause for concern, you assumed that the arrangements for discharging the Article 8 duty were in fact adequate?
I'm not sure whether I would have assumed that. Can you just ask the question again, just to make sure I've got the...
Yeah, is it fair to say that if Janice Ray didn't raise any specific concerns, you assumed or proceeded on the basis that the arrangements for discharging the obligation under Article 8 were adequate?
It would not only be Janice, I would be relying on Carl Stokes and the audits that we also undertook internally. So it wouldn't just be Janice.
There'll be other sources upon which you...
Yes.
Now, it's up on the screen. We can see that Article 9 risk assessment, and we can see that Article 9.1 imposes an obligation on the responsible person to make a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks to which relevant persons are exposed for the purpose of identifying the general fire precautions he needs to take to comply with the requirements and prohibitions imposed on him by or under this order. Would you agree that that duty required the responsible person to carry out a suitable and sufficient assessment of risks?
Yes.
And in that regard, did the RBKC do anything in relation to carrying out risk assessments, to your knowledge?
I don't know.
Did you proceed on the understanding that it was the TMO that carried out the risk assessments as the responsible person?
Well, I must have done, because I didn't know what RBKC were doing, so I would, as part of the TMO and being part of the responsible person, need to make sure that we had suitable risk assessment.
Could I ask you to turn to Article 9, fire safety arrangements? Sorry, Article 11, I should say, sorry. You see, Article 11.1 requires the responsible person to give effect to such arrangements as are appropriate, having regard to the size of his undertaking and the nature of its activities, for the effective planning, organisation, control, monitoring and review of the preventive and protective measures. And 11.2 goes on to impose a separate duty on the responsible person to record the arrangements referred to above, where he employs 5 or more employees. A licence under enactment is in force in relation to the premises, or an alterations notice is in force. Now, would you agree with me that the TMO, as the responsible person, is required to put in place an arrangement to manage the risk of fire?
Yes.
And that arrangement should set out in writing how the TMO would plan, organise, control, monitor and review preventive and protective fire safety measures?
Yes.
Who in the TMO was responsible for making those arrangements?
Well, I suppose that was within my health and safety team, and that would have been Janice who would put together the documentation, but some of the activity there would not necessarily be in her area.
So who would be primarily responsible for ensuring that those arrangements were in place?
Because reading this as it's written, it looks like there are responsibilities that are not within the health and safety area, but to ensure that certain things are in place, that would be under health and safety, and therefore Janice reporting into myself.
And for which you had executive responsibility?
I did, yes.
Now, were the arrangements to discharge the Article 11 duty, were they set out in one or more documents?
They were set out in the health and safety policy, and also in the fire strategy document, as far as I remember the details of it.
Now, how did you satisfy yourself about the adequacy of the arrangements set out in those documents?
Those documents were reviewed during my time, and we would have looked at the current legislation and regulation to ensure that they were up to date, but also we would look at the processes that we had in place.
Now, you've used the word "we" there. The health and safety policy and the fire safety strategy, they were reviewed by whom, first of all?
Janice would have done the first review, but she would have sat down with me to discuss any proposed changes that we wanted to put in.
Did you propose your own changes, or did you await Janice's proposals for changes?
We would have done the document sort of in tandem, where she would have gone through and put proposed changes in. I would have put what I felt needed to go in. There was an area on responsibilities that needed to be clearly outlined, so and amended to strengthen actually the role that I took within health and safety.
And that was your
Yes, it
idea.
was. Yes.
And in what respects did you consider that your responsibilities needed to be set out more succinctly or clearly?
Because I think it was a bit woolly in terms of my role in terms of health and safety. And I think you mentioned it when you said, was my role just to chair the meeting? The way it was originally worded, it looked a bit like that, whereas in fact my role was to manage health and safety across the organisation, and it needed to put in that managerial responsibility.
Thank you. Now, can we look at some of the guidance that was available in relation to fire risk assessment, management systems, I should say?
Yeah.
And first of all, could I look at, have you heard of, if I refer to PAS, do you know what I'm referring to? Publicly Available Specification 7.
The only reason I know of that document is because I've seen the evidence come up. I had not seen that document.
And you'd never seen it before?
I hadn't till it came up in the evidence.
Well, let us go through it, because
Okay.
notwithstanding the guidance, there are some broad issues of principle that I'd like to discuss with you. Now, if we could look at PAS 7 in its 2013 version, it's entitled Fire Risk Management System Specification, can be found at BSI *0071/20. And if we could look in particular at subparagraph 6.2.2.1, which says the organisational shall employ or contract with people who are competent on the basis of education, training, skills and experience for the tasks assigned to them. And if we go further down that page to paragraph 6.3, under the heading Awareness, it says this: persons doing work under the organisation's control shall be aware of A, the fire safety policy, B, their contribution to the effectiveness of the FRMS, so that's the fire risk management system, including the benefits of improved fire safety performance, C, the implications of not conforming with the FRMS requirements, D, any risk to them arising from or in connection with the work they're intended to do. Now, would you agree that the guidance requires competence for fire safety tasks assigned to relevant individuals?
Yes.
And those within the organisation, including yourself, should be aware of the TMO's fire safety policy. Would you agree?
Yes.
And you should be aware of your role in relation to the fire risk management system and policy. Would you agree?
Yes.
And the implications of not conforming with the FRMS and the policy should be known to those assigned with fire safety responsibility.
Yes.
And one of those consequences, of course, is injury or death.
Yes.
Can we turn on to page 25 within this document to section 8? It's entitled Management Review, and 8.3.1, and apologies for reading this, Ms. Matthews, probably
That's
easier.
okay.
Top management shall review the organisation's FRMS at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy and effectiveness. Note 1, review should include assessing opportunities for improvement and the need for changes to the management system, including the policy and objectives. Note 2, they refer to a pro forma. 8.3.2, the management review shall include consideration of A, the status of actions from previous management reviews, B, changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the FRMS, C, information on the fire safety performance, including trends in 1, non-conformities and corrective actions, 2, monitoring and measurement results, 3, audit results, 4, interested party feedback, 5, evaluation of compliance with legal and other requirements, and then D, opportunities and recommendations for continual improvement. And then looking further to 8.3.3, the outputs of the management review shall include decisions related to A, continual improvement opportunities, B, improvement related to interested party requirements, C, resource needs to enable improvement to the FRMS and its processes, and D, any need for changes to the FRMS. Note, the need for changes to the FRMS may arise from, for example, developments in legal and other requirements, changing circumstances related to the organisation's hazard and associated risks. Now, stopping there, according to that guidance, the TMO should have had a system which allowed for a management review, as opposed to external review or audit, of its fire risk management systems at planned intervals. Would you agree that's a fair summary?
It is, yes.
Do you agree that the TMO didn't have such a system in place?
I don't believe we had a formal system that had this management review, but the Health and Safety Committee certainly did review some of that information. But as it stands there, we didn't have a formal, this is a management review of fire safety systems in place. No.
No. And so the height of it was informal consideration of some of the matters set out in 8.3.2.
I think so, yes.
Can you identify for us, looking at 8.3.2, the subjects that were considered, albeit informally, by you and the executive team? Looking at number A, did you examine the status of actions from previous management reviews?
Well,
If there weren't any, presumably
you can't look at actions if, yes.
So that's a no. B, changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the FRMS.
I think we definitely looked at those when issues came up, when changes came up externally, or we had any issues internally. I think we did look at those.
C, information on the fire safety performance, including those 5 trends set out under little c.
I do believe we did look at some of those. We may not have looked at interested party feedback.
Stopping there, interested party feedback, would you agree that included the views of residents?
Yeah, that was the point I was about to make.
And that's not something you considered?
Not in these reviews, unless there was an issue raised specifically by a resident about a particular block or concern that they had.
How did you evaluate compliance with legal and other requirements?
I think the only way I can answer that is that I would rely on Janice as the technical person to confirm that we were in fact complying with legal and other requirements.
And finally, looking at opportunities and recommendations for continual improvement.
I think that was something that did come up sort of regularly through review of the fire risk assessments in particular. But I do think we looked at that, yes.
Can you help us as to why there was no formal policy for carrying out a management review as recommended under PAS 7?
I'm sorry, I don't know why there wasn't a formal policy, and I agree there should have been.
Did anyone raise the need for such a formal management review during your time?
No.
And presumably it didn't occur to you either?
No, I mean, I was doing parts of it, but didn't realise that this document existed and this is what was required.
Just thinking through about the informal processes that were in place, was there any sort of review either by the executive team, by you, or by Mr. Black, or all of those parties, of the information collected by the TMO in relation to its fire safety performance?
Well, yes. I mean, we would review the fire risk assessment actions, which are part of fire safety performance, and in particular, the Health and Safety Committee we would look in quite a lot of sort of detail into the statistics of that, and that information also went to the executive team.
Now, staying with 8.3.2, but looking at 8.3.2C3, it refers there to audit results. Was there any audit worthy of the name of the fire safety performance by the any audit by the TMO of its own fire safety performance or fire safety management?
We had a programme of internal audits, one of which was health and safety, covering all the health and safety responsibilities. And in that, the scope of that audit covered fire safety. I can't remember all the details of it, but I'm aware that it did cover fire safety, and it was about the management systems for health and safety.
Thank you. Now, were you aware of a number of external audits carried out of the fire safety function?
In terms of the LFB doing their inspections and audits of buildings, yes, I was aware of that.
More broadly than that, Ms Matthews, were you aware of a fire risk assessment of the TMO's fire safety policy and procedures that had been carried out by Salvus in September 2009?
I was aware of some of the history before I joined, but I didn't see the Salvus report until after all of this occurred.
So after the fire?
Well after the fire.
And so no one ever referred in discussions, and Janice Ray never brought the Salvus audit to your attention?
She might have referred to it and referred to the fact that there was a limited assurance internal audit on health and safety, and that a lot of work had gone on in the past before I joined to improve the systems, my understanding was, in terms of the internal audit, that had now got a much better rating, which I can't remember.
Did you form the impression that Ms Ray's view of the Salvus audit was that it was fair criticism that had been made, or did you sense that she felt that the criticism was unfair?
No, I think she was aware that it was a fair criticism and a fair report on the health and safety systems at that time.
And were you aware of a safety management review carried out by Matt Hodgson in 2013?
I was aware of it, but I didn't see the details of it.
And you never had cause to read it?
No.
Was it ever referred to in discussions by Janice Ray or indeed anyone else who predated you?
Anyone else that predated me?
Predated your time, who'd been at the TMO before you joined?
Well, I wouldn't...
No, people who'd been still employed at the TMO.
Yes.
Like Janice Ray.
Yes, sorry.
Who'd been there before you joined.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and Janice would have referred to it because I was aware of the training programme that had occurred and some of the other actions that report had identified. But my understanding there was, again, a number of those were already in place and moving forward.
Presumably you would have been aware of the RBKC audit into health and safety that was carried out in 2016,
Yes.
during your tenure?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you didn't read audit reports that predated your start at the TMO in June 2015?
I might well have read the health and safety one that had limited assurance.
Thank you.
Because I would have read it alongside the scope for the audit in 2016.
Now, are you aware of a set of regulations called the Fire Safety Employees Capabilities England Regulations 2010?
I'm not sure that I am.
Is that a no then?
Yes, a no.
Now, Regulation 2 provides this, and if we go to the document, so you've got it in front of you, HOM 000 25737. we don't necessarily have to have up on the screen. It provides every employer must, in entrusting tasks to employees, take into account their capabilities as regards health and safety, so far as those capabilities relate to the fire. Now, bearing in mind that you are unfamiliar with the obligation, how did you take into account the fire safety capabilities, first of all, of someone like Janice Ray?
Well, I was aware of Janice's qualifications and the experience that she'd already got in the role. And from working with her, I was well aware that she was a very competent person in relation to fire safety. And also I was aware when I joined that Carl Stokes was in place, and she used him as a consultant, not just for the fire risk assessment programme, but if there were any issues related to fire safety. So as in terms of Janice Ray, that's how I had assessed her capability and competence.
Was there any central record held by the TMO of the fire safety capabilities of relevant employees such as Janice Ray or contractors such as Carl Stokes?
I'm not aware of a central register. I am sure that within Janice's HR record, it would be recorded her training and her qualification, the various qualifications she'd got and the training that she'd done, that would be recorded.
Is it right to say that you had no cause to check whether she had the relevant qualifications because she'd impressed you by the means she carried out her job?
I'm sure when I joined, I would have looked at her HR information, as I did with all my new team members, and would have been aware from that record of the qualifications that she got.
Thank you.
Or had.
Thank you. Now, I want to turn on to a separate topic now, which is competency criteria for fire risk managers. And if I could ask you to go to page 5 of the competency criteria for fire risk managers, which can be found at FSF quadruple 0 0041 /5. There we go. In section 3 is headed competency of fire risk manager, and there is advice for varying size of organisations. And if we look at the 4th paragraph, it starts with the words for large organisations. And it says this: for large organisations, and certainly those with extensive estate portfolios, fire risk management will be a complex role and should be undertaken by a competent, dedicated fire risk manager. Now, bearing that in mind, given that there were 650 blocks in the TMO's estate, did you at the time consider that you had sufficient resources within the health and safety team to manage fire risk without a dedicated fire risk manager?
Probably at the time I would have done, only because Janice wasn't at that time advising me that that was a concern or an issue to her. But subsequently, I think it's fairly obvious it would be advisable and obviously appropriate to have a dedicated fire risk manager. I didn't know that at the time.
And during your time at the TMO, you never had cause to consider the benefits of appointing a dedicated fire risk manager?
No.
Can I now turn to RBKC's role and in relation to its monitoring of health and safety in particular? Now, can I ask you to look at Janice Ray's first statement to the inquiry, which can be found at TMO quadruple 0 0890 /37. And if I could ask you to look at paragraph 164. It says, it was always my understanding that the RBKC retained a monitoring obligation under the Modular Management Agreement, which was exercised by its Corporate Health and Safety Advisor and its main Health and Safety Coordinating Committee, which was succeeded by the Borough Health and Safety Committee. First of all, were you aware of RBKC's monitoring obligation?
I was, yes.
Did you ever have cause to consult the MMA?
About this specifically, no, but I had looked at the MMA on something else.
Thank you. Did you ever meet RBKC's corporate health and safety advisors, Gary Mann until 2015 and Samaya Yaqub from January 2016?
No, those names don't ring a bell.
At all?
No.
Did you meet anyone else from RBKC to discuss oversight of performance by the TMO of its health and safety obligations?
Health and safety was discussed at the joint management meeting with RBKC. I did not attend any corporate health and safety meetings with RBKC.
Were you ever pressed on particular questions relating to health and safety by anyone at RBKC, whether it's Laura Johnson or councillors?
We would have been asked questions by councillors that may have come up from residents in their area. And in fact, there were a few while I was there. And Laura Johnson would have asked us about health and safety performance when we were reviewing the annual report with her.
You've used the formula would have.
What she did, sorry.
That's what I meant to ask.
Yeah, apologies.
Should we take that as meaning
yes,
she did?
Yes.
Now, Gary Mann, who's the corporate health and safety advisor at RBKC until 2015, he said in his witness statement, we don't need to go to it, but the reference is RBK 000544414/4 at page 8, paragraph 36, said this, and I quote, "There was no formal process in place which required the corporate health and safety team to attend at the TMO offices and check them for health and safety compliance or call for their policies and procedures to be checked for compliance." Do you agree with that statement, that there was no formal process in place?
I agree.
Do you know why there was no formal process?
I don't know, because I believe there should be.
Did you have any reason at the time to call for a formal process?
No.
Now, Samaya Yaqub, Mr. Mann's successor, has also provided a statement to the inquiry. She said at page 8 of paragraph 35 of that statement, and the reference is RBK 000544456/8. We don't need to go to it. But she said this, and I quote, "Corporate health and safety did not routinely monitor or audit the general safety arrangements for the TMO. I understood that TMO was audited by RBKC's auditing department, who were on occasion assisted by Deloitte. I do not recall seeing any audit reports in relation to the TMO or hearing of any significant issues as a result of the audits." Did Samaya Yaqub ever seek to exercise a monitoring function in relation to the performance by the TMO of its health and safety duties?
Not that I was aware of.
Did anyone, to the best of your knowledge at RBKC, challenge the TMO over the exercise of its health and safety duties?
Not that I'm aware of.
And presumably, if someone had made that challenge to Janice Ray, she would have reported it.
She would have done, yes.
Can we now turn to consider the corporate risk map? First of all, what is the point of a corporate risk map?
What is the point? It's to bring up the, to document and identify the key strategic risks for the business and the responsibility for any mitigating actions.
And when you joined the TMO, did you read the TMO's corporate risk map?
I did, yes.
Now, can we look at an example of the risk map? And it's dated the 16th of March 2017. And that can be found at TMO 008999699. If we can look at risk number 1. If that could be amplified to see risk number 1. I'm sorry, it's maybe one of those documents, so the greater you expand it, the less clear it becomes. But take it from me, it says, failure to comply with statute and regulation, procurement legislation, data protection, equality and diversity, financial and internal controls, safeguarding, probity, bribery and fraud. Now, presumably, it can't come as any surprise to you that failure to comply with health and safety is regarded as a risk.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Yes.
Can we look at the column, which is fourth along from the left-hand side, headed Risk Identified and Explanation? Apologies, that too is indecipherable. I'll read it out to you.
Thank you.
Poor organisational governance leads to failings in the areas of substantial or sustained breach of statutory or regulatory obligations, failure to appoint the right contractors, limits ability to deliver programmes, risk of contractor challenge with financial penalties, risk of under-recovery of leaseholder service charges. Legal challenges can result from poor financial controls and poor safeguarding issues. Reputational damage can arise from mismanagement of any of these issues. Now, I think the first point is that poor organisational governance leads to substantial or sustained breach of statutory or regulatory obligations. Presumably, you'd accept that as a risk.
Yes.
And the reverse could equally be true, that breach of statutory or regulatory obligations may arise through poor organisational governance as well.
Yes.
And the second point, failure to appoint the right contractors, you were aware of the need to control that particular risk, were you?
Yes.
How did the TMO ensure that in relation to fire safety, it had appointed competent contractors?
In terms of appointing contractors for fire safety, again, that would be in the responsibility of the contracts management team, and Peter Madison would have been overall responsible to ensure that we had the right contractors with the right qualifications. The other thing that we did towards, and I can't remember when he joined, but we had an interim procurement manager who helped to ensure that the procurement process ensured that we knew what level of qualification contractors had, what their experience was, and what their expertise was.
Can we look at risk number 5? Which says failure of health and safety in relation to the services that we deliver to residents, staff in the work environment and contractors in the delivery of works. That appears to include fire safety, would you agree?
Yes.
And if we read along to the left, under the column risk identified and explanation, it says this: serious injury or death of a resident, staff member, contractor, customer or member of the public, potential prosecution by health and safety executive, including terrorist activity. Would you accept that's a clear recognition of the importance of the risk, not least the prospect of a health and safety prosecution?
Yes.
But equally, and perhaps more importantly, the risk of serious injury or death?
Yes.
And to put it bluntly, the consequences of a failure to manage health and safety duties may result in serious injury or death?
Yes.
Can we look at the column headed existing control measures, mitigation or elimination? Slightly further along. And it says this: health and safety committee meetings every 2 months involving ET and SMT members, so executive team and senior management team members, where fire risk assessments and associated actions, water quality and asbestos reviews are monitored. Resulting actions are monitored and audited. Internal audit also monitor and report. Emergency planning tested in real events and has been reviewed as a consequence. So monitoring of FRAs and associated actions is considered to be the existing control measure for fire safety. Would you agree?
Yes.
And the resulting actions are to be monitored presumably by executive team and the senior management team?
Yes.
Who was to carry out the auditing?
You talk about the internal, resulting
let's
actions
deal with
are
internal.
monitored. Sorry, resulting actions are monitored and audited. That's what you're referring to.
I am.
I think the understanding was that was a self-audit that we would, if you like, review the process and the resulting actions and our performance, our own performance in that, through the Health and Safety Committee.
So there would be no external review, for example, by RBKC?
The only external review would have been through the internal audit process.
Can you remember, was there any specific internal or indeed external audit of the monitoring of FRAs or indeed the entire FRA process?
It not specifically, as I said, it was part of the overall health and safety internal audit.
Now, under the residual risk column, it says this: actions arising out of assessments and inspections not done in a timely manner. Would you agree that clearly set out actions needed to be done in a timely manner?
Absolutely.
The person with who's fixed with responsibility for this risk is DFS, that's the Director of Financial Services.
Yes.
That's you.
Yes,
And you're aware that a failure to manage this risk could lead to serious injury or death.
absolutely.
Did you ever set out a specific departmental risk map, i.e. for your department, including health and safety, which included health and safety risks?
I thought we had, but I actually can't remember whether we did. We may have started that risk map, but I can't remember. I thought we had.
You certainly have no memory of a finalised, adopted and applied risk map for your department. Is that a fair summary?
That is a fair summary.
Were you or any of your managers trained in risk management and how to manage the risks identified in the risk map?
I'm not sure whether we'd had any specific training, but and I can't say whether my managers had that training before I joined, but I did make it clear to them the importance of the risks that they were responsible for. That they were responsible for.
Were you trained? Is the bit of the question you haven't answered.
Oh, sorry. I have had training in risk management prior to joining the TMO, and have had responsibility for corporate risk maps and risk management.
Now, can I turn to the separate topic of the TMO's health and safety policy, which you referred to in earlier
Yes.
answers? Now, can we look at your second statement, which can be found at TMO 00873 and paragraph 4. Thank you. Now, there you say, and I quote, the TMO's main policies in relation to fire safety were the health and safety policy and TMO fire safety strategy. The fire safety strategy was being reviewed and updated during the time I was at the TMO, with the final draft being presented to the Health and Safety Committee on the day before the fire on the 14th of June 2017. Now, can we look at the health and safety policy first, which can be found at TMO 100244402? First of all, did you read... actually, I should have... This is the 20... If you can not expand it. You see the date of it is February 2016. Yes. Were you involved in the preparation of that policy? Is it post-dated you're joining the TMO?
The policy existed. We reviewed it in February, a final review, February 2016.
And did you participate in that review?
I did.
And what was your contribution to this policy?
The main thing was about the responsibilities and roles.
And clarifying and making
Yes.
more concrete your own responsibilities?
Yes.
And to the best of your recollection, that was the significant change that you made?
That was the significant change I made, yes.
Now, if I can ask you to look at paragraph 1.2, it says this: the legal operational financial responsibility for the management of health and safety rests with the chief executive of the TMO, and each director and manager is responsible for the implementation, execution, control and monitoring of this policy as relevant to their area of business. In effect, Mr. Black was ultimately responsible for health and safety. Is that fair?
Yes.
And you, as director in charge of health and safety, were responsible for the implementation, execution, control and monitoring of the health and safety policy?
I was, yes.
Now, if we can go on to paragraph 1.4, it says we will ensure that all persons are competent to carry out the duties asked of them, and we will provide adequate information, instruction, training and necessary supervision. We'll employ a health and safety professional who will be responsible for providing advice on all health, safety and welfare matters. Now, that means, it would appear, that you were responsible for ensuring that all persons were competent to discharge their health and safety obligations. Is that right?
As it's written there, yes, that's what it says, yeah.
So you were?
Yes.
To discharge that function effectively, you too would have to be competent to discharge our health and safety duties. Would you agree with that?
I would.
And you were to ensure that adequate information, instruction, training and necessary supervision would be provided to all employees. Is that again correct?
Yes.
And would that include ensuring that you yourself were adequately trained?
It would, yes.
Was there any policy document which set out the competence standards required or the training requirements required for those who had key roles in the TMO's management of health and safety?
I don't think there was a document.
Do you know why not?
I don't. I think.
Did anyone raise that particular issue when this policy was reviewed?
I don't think so, no.
Can we
Right,
look at,
did you say a moment ago that you think there should have been such a document?
I do, yes. I think it needed that to support this statement.
Thank you.
can we turn to paragraph 3.3 on page 4, please? Again, apologies for reading this out, Miss Matthews. As the managing agents for Kensington Chelsea's housing stock, the TMO shares responsibility with RBKC for the provision and maintenance of a safe and healthy environment for the residents. It is therefore important that we continue to work closely with RBKC in the area of health and safety. To facilitate this, the Health and Safety team will continue to represent the TMO on the Bi-Borough Corporate Health and Safety Committee, which is responsible for the coordination and promotion of health and safety measures across RBKC and Hammersmith and Fulham, and for monitoring compliance C. First, were you aware that the TMO shared responsibility with RBKC for the provision and maintenance of a safe environment for residents?
Yes.
How did shared responsibility work in practice?
Well, RBKC obviously owned the stock, as I mentioned before, and the TMO was the managing agent. Any works done to the properties were the money for that was provided by RBKC. So their role was to provide sufficient funds to enable the works required to be completed.
At any time during your tenure, did you have reservations that the funds provided were sufficient to discharge health and safety obligations?
I think our budget was restricted in terms of the work that was required on some of the buildings, and therefore it on an annual basis this is, and therefore some of the works perhaps were not done as quick as they should do because the funds weren't there.
So when you say restricted, is that a different way of saying there was a budget?
There was budget, yes.
Mindful that there will be a budget, did you have any concerns that the budget had been drawn too tightly, which was endangering the proper performance of health and safety obligations by the TMO?
I wasn't sure that it was too tight in relation to health and safety, because if there were specific requirements which we couldn't manage within our existing annual budget, we would refer back to RBKC for additional funds. For instance, the discussion about replacement doors, a replacement door and self-closer programme, when we started to talk about that after the Adair fire.
Put bluntly, was there any time when you asked for more money for health and safety matters and the council said no?
I don't think so, no.
Presumably that would spring to mind if they had said no and you'd asked for it.
Yes, I mean, the only time they've said no is not to do a programme in 3 years, but to do it in 5. So you could argue that's a no, but that was a no, not now sort of thing.
Understood. So was RBKC's contribution made only via the Bi-Borough Corporate Health and Safety team, if it had anything to contribute on the substance of health and safety matters?
I believe it came up at any health and safety matters, and RBKC's role would have come up when we discussed it at the joint management meeting. And I believe that the asset management meeting we also had with RBKC, we would have raised about health and safety matters on properties then.
Thank you. Did you ever attend the Bi-Borough Corporate Health and Safety?
I didn't attend that one, no.
Did you yourself have any liaison with health and safety personnel at RBKC on health and safety matters?
I don't think so, no.
Did Gary Mann or Samaya Yaqub ever attend TMO Health and Safety Committee meetings that you're aware of?
No, not in my time.
And you don't remember either or both of them intervening on any health and safety
I
matters?
don't remember that, no.
Would it have stuck in your memory if they had done?
I think it probably would.
Can we go next to paragraph 6.1, which is contractor management? I think you possibly answered my question here, but just to sort of, for the sake of completeness, 6.1 sets out the vetting of contractors for
Yes.
competence and adequate resources.
Yes.
And essence, your answer to the question, who within the TMO vetted contractors for competence, that would be the
Contract management team. And through the procurement process that I mentioned and the procurement manager, that our interim procurement manager.
Looking at that question slightly differently, how would the TMO satisfy itself as the competence of contractors in relation to health and safety matters? Is that something that would be purely within the jurisdiction of contract management, or would it be within Janice's remit?
No, it would. If it was a health and safety contractor, then Janice would be involved and would be. She would review the tender documentation as well to ensure that the organisation was competent to do whatever it was we wanted to do. I mean, I was thinking here specifically in relation to fire stopping. But if it was a contractor to do a repairs, but I can't think of a particular contract, but one that wasn't specifically health and safety, then that would be dealt with by the contracts manager, and their role was to ensure that they understood the organisation's health and safety policy.
Thank you. Now, can I take you next to paragraph 10, which is at page 6, and it's to do with fire safety and emergency procedures. And we see there at 10.1, fire risk assessments are undertaken in workplaces and within the communal areas of residential blocks as required, and systems are in place to protect staff, contractors and residents, etc. from the risk of fire. Managers are responsible for ensuring that workplace housekeeping is in good order and that smoking is not permitted in any TMO workplace. Where necessary, automatic fire detection, portable firefighting appliances, dry rising firefighting mains, emergency lighting and other fire safety measures are installed and maintained in the workplace and other locations. Designated staff members are appointed and regularly trained to act as fire marshals will take control in the event of any of our workplaces requiring evacuation. Would you agree that and particularly bearing in mind the last sentence there, that the weight of this particular provision is on workplace fire and safety and the relevant procedures?
That is, yes.
There doesn't appear, certainly to my reading, to be much consideration of the particular issues affecting TMO residents and fire safety. Is that a fair observation in your view?
In that part of it, yes.
The part of it under the heading fire safety and emergency procedures?
Yes. This is the health and safety policy for the organisation. So that's why this is looking at workplaces.
You didn't think that the organisation included buildings managed by the TMO?
I don't think that's what this document was intended to cover, and that the fire strategy covers the properties and the residents.
Just following on from that answer, can we go back to paragraph 3.3 at page 4? As managing agents for Kensington and Chelsea's houses, the TMO shares responsibility with RBKC for the provision and maintenance of a safe and healthy environment for the residents. Bearing in mind that, would you want to reconsider the answer you've just given in relation to paragraph 10.1? To go back to 10.1 at page 6. Because it seems, put bluntly, the scope of this policy is deliberately aimed to embrace not only employees but also residents of the TMO.
That's how it appears from that earlier paragraph. but this, you're correct in saying that this is clearly aimed at workplaces rather than buildings and residents.
Well, let's follow that through and look at 10
Well,
points.
it's a bit both, isn't it? Because if you look at the opening to paragraph 10.1, it refers to the communal areas of residential blocks and the protection of residents, amongst others. So it starts by being quite broad, and then it tends to go on to direct itself more to employees rather than residents.
Yes, that's. You're right, it does. It starts with covering residents, but then looks at workplaces. I can't answer that. When I read it initially, it seemed okay because I read it alongside the fire strategy, but you're right, yes.
So might it have been an assumption you made that the health and safety policy applied at least predominantly to staff rather than residents?
That's how it appears.
Now, if that is so, can we look at 10.3, which says employees with disabilities have their own individual personal emergency evacuation plan, which is regularly reviewed, and where necessary, their colleagues are trained in safe use of the evacuation chair. Were you aware of the concept, the notion of a personal emergency evacuation plan when this policy was reviewed and signed off?
Yes, I was.
Now, 10.3 makes clear that PEEPs are required for employees with disabilities.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes,
And that those policies would be reviewed regularly.
yes,
Now, the policy makes no mention of the need for PEEPs for residents. Would you agree with that?
yes,
Or of disabled residents?
yes.
Can you help us understand why such residents were omitted from this policy?
Again, I think this appears that it's related to staff in the workplace, and that we haven't, quite rightly, as you say, looking at it now, mentioned residents. However, in relation to personal emergency evacuation plans for residents, the policy in our buildings was a stay put and defend in place policy, and therefore we had not addressed personal emergency evacuation plans.
And was that reasoning expressly considered as part of the review process that culminated in this health and safety policy?
For residents, or
Yes. Was that an after the event rationalisation for its omission?
no, I don't know why it appears that this is for aimed at staff rather than residents.
Can I just ask you, you say that you had a stay put strategy,
Yes.
but did anyone think about the fact that an individual person, a disabled person, might need to evacuate from his or her flat or the floor on which his or her flat was located, even if everybody else in the building was able to stay put in their flats?
In terms of the residents in the buildings, we were aware of some residents' vulnerabilities only if either they'd advised us or the neighbourhood management team had managed to acquire that information through various
So
sources.
I understand that, but my point is a slightly different one. You were seeking to explain the absence of any reference to PEEPs for residents
Yeah.
by reference to the existence of a stay put policy. But I was just wondering whether it had occurred to anyone that even in the context of a stay put policy generally, some resident or residents might need to evacuate if the fire, for example, was in their flat or had escaped from a neighbour's flat into the lobby and was threatening their flat, and might have difficulty in doing so.
I don't think we had considered that aspect as we probably should have done.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So that might be an appropriate point, subject to your approval, for The afternoon break.
Yes, all right. Well, we have a break during the afternoon, Ms Matthews, and I think that's a good time to take the break today.
Thank you.
We'll resume at 25 to 4, please. And I must ask you on this and other occasions when you leave the room during your evidence not to talk about it, your evidence to anyone once you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to go to the usher,
Thank
please?
you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kinnear. 25 to 4. Thank you. Thank you. Would you ask Ms Matthews to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, you ready to carry on?
I am, thank you.
Good, yeah, so take a moment to pour some water.
Yes, I'll just pour some water. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. When you're ready, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. Ms Matthews, can we now turn to the TMO's fire safety strategies? Now, before we go through those strategies, is it correct to say that the TMO had one and one alone fire safety strategy to cover its entire stock?
Yes.
Now, can we look at the fire safety strategy you exhibited to your statement? And that can be found at TMO 00830598. And if we can turn to page 15. There we go, and we see the date at the bottom is November 2013. Was that the version that was current when you joined the TMO?
Yes.
And when did you first read it?
Probably when I first joined. I can't actually remember when I did, but it would have been early on when I joined the organisation.
Can we go back and look at section 1.4? Thank you. Which says this strategy document enables us to outline the measures we have put in place, not just to comply with fire safety legislation and best practice, but, more importantly, to minimise the risk of fire throughout the housing stock. Specifically, we are committed to reducing the risk of an outbreak of fire and also the risk of a fire spreading within a building, but also spreading from one building to another. Now, the intention was for this document to be the overarching strategy which outlined the TMO's approach to fire safety. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
And it was written by Janice Ray?
I believe so. It was before my time, so I'm assuming it was.
And was it a document to which you made regular reference or not at all?
Oh no, I did look at it quite regularly.
Can we look at section 5 on page 2? And if we just look at some of the bullet points under section 5.1 at the bottom of that page, we see programme of regular estate inspection, risk assessments and monitoring by neighbourhood staff and health and safety staff. Specifically, inspections ensure that combustible items and storage are not present in the communal areas, fire doors are operating effectively, emergency lighting is maintained, final exit doors are operational, signage has not been removed or defaced, wet-dry riser cabinets have not been tampered with, any communal area repairs have been completed to a satisfactory standard, etc. All defects repairs are reported immediately by mobile telephone to the customer services centre, who instigate the repair. Repairs to fire doors, self-closers, etc. are given priority. So a programme of regular estate inspection, risk assessments and monitoring by neighbourhood and health and safety staff. What risk assessments have been referred to here, so far as you understand it?
The inspections or the risk assessment, which bit are you referring to? Because this is about a series of inspection regime.
Well, this is the question I'm asking you, Ms Matthews. You were the one who referred to it regularly.
Sorry. Can I go back to the start of that bullet point, please? Regular estate inspections, risk assessments and monitoring. The regular estate inspections were done mainly by the neighbourhood staff. The health and safety staff would do the risk assessments and the monitoring of the actions.
Understood. We see the question of repairs highlighted here.
Yes.
Repairs to fire doors, self-closers, etc., and they are given priority. Can you help with whether that referred to communal doors or all doors across the TMO's stock?
I believe it was for all doors across the stock.
And to the extent to which you were aware, were those repairs in fact given priority?
As far as I was aware, they were.
Now, if we can turn over the page to page 3 and look at the third bullet point, which states regular fire risk assessments. And it says regular fire risk assessments, FRAs, and reviews, and a prioritised approach to progressing action plan items. What were the reviews referred to here? Can you help us?
My understanding was that those were the reviews that we would do of the fire risk assessments, and to apportion the work.
So they would be internal reviews of the FRAs carried out by
Yes.
Mr. Stokes?
Yes, there would be.
And there's no mention here of timescales for implementing action plan items or to emphasise their completion in a timely manner, to use the language of the corporate risk map. Can you explain that omission?
The timing of the actions, or the requirement for the timing of the actions, is identified in the FRA action plan, and the FRAs themselves give the timing that the action should be completed by. But you're correct in saying that there is nothing about completing those in a timely manner.
Was that timeliness, was it ever something that was considered as a necessary addition to the strategy? For example, looking at the issues that were thrown up by the FRA significant action problem?
It obviously wasn't, because I think this is repeated in the same way. It wasn't updated to say that in the 2016 one. And hindsight, it looks like it should say something.
Thank you. Now, if we can look at the penultimate bullet point on page 3, which is entitled Fire Safety. Thank you. Fire safety of residents, staff and contractors will be considered at every stage of construction projects and will be reflected in construction stage plans, risk assessments and method statements. Compliance with building regulations is paramount. Engagement with contractors to reinforce the need to ensure that all works are made good good to a fire resisting standard, and that contractors adequately train their operatives in order to facilitate this. Post inspections will also scrutinise this aspect of works. Who was responsible for ensuring compliance with that aspect of the strategy, i.e. for ensuring that fire safety was reflected in construction stage plans, risk assessments and method statements?
That would have fallen into the asset and regeneration team, where any construction or any refurbishment or major works to the properties would have been managed, and the contracts that would have been set up accordingly for those works.
And who was responsible for ensuring that works were, quotes, made good to a fire-resisting standard, close quotes?
That would be the responsibility of asset management.
Would health and safety have any role in that?
That health and safety would have a role in ensuring that they are doing that they are checking that the works are compliant and that works are made good fire resisting standards.
So health and safety would be responsible for post-inspection checks on works being carried out to requisite standard?
Not the post-inspection works, because post-inspection you're not seeing what's going on. Health and safety would review things as the works are going on, and liaise with the asset management team to ensure that's happening. The post-inspections referred to there are the post-inspections done by within the asset management team.
Thank you. If we can go to page 9 and the stay put, defend in place strategy, and can we look at that, please, at the bottom? There you go. If we go to page 10, see 15.1. The FRA confirms the appropriate evacuation strategy for the block. Overwhelmingly, a stay put, defend in place has been highlighted as the appropriate strategy for our blocks, and the LFB have been made aware of this. Specifically, this means that only the residents in the flat where the fire breaks out are initially required to evacuate. This is because the compartmentation, both between the flats and also between the flats and the common parts of the block, are considered to be sufficient to withstand fire for a significant period. This is communicated to residents via a variety of means: residents' handbook, website, the Link magazine, etc. So the evacuation strategy is premised on a block-by-block basis. Is that a fair reading?
Yes.
Of that? And the specific strategy will depend upon the FRA for each block. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was there any system whereby the TMO defined and implemented fire safety precautions on a block-by-block basis?
Fire safety precautions. We would have looked at the difference in each block, because each block was built differently. So you'll have different design of maybe communal areas, or use of lifts, or staircases.
And looking at evacuation in particular here, there appears to be no distinction between the different types of residents in a block, i.e. Between those who are able-bodied, for example, and those who may have mobility issues.
No, that's correct.
Did you or anyone at the TMO consider whether the strategy should deal with a situation where the LFB changed its advice from stay put to full or partial evacuation?
On a sort of permanent basis for a particular block you're talking about, or just generally?
In any respect before the Grenfell Tower fire on the 14th?
I don't think we'd looked at that at all.
Can we go back to paragraph 43 of your first witness statement, which is at TMO 1004987/9 and paragraph 43? And you deal here with the Adair Tower fire, which was at the end of October 2013, and the LFB made the decision to abandon the stay put policy. Did you consider whether the TMO should inform residents what to do if, as happened at Adair Tower, the LFB changed its advice?
No, we didn't, because the LFB made that decision. The policy in that building was a stay put policy. During the fire itself, the LFB made the decision to evacuate the residents, and they initiated the evacuation. TMO staff didn't.
No, well, putting to one side who initiated the withdrawal of the policy, did the TMO consider at any stage following the Adair Tower fire of what ought to be done if a fire broke out and a disabled resident could not evacuate their flat?
No, I don't think so.
Can we look next at the policy governing flat entrance doors, and that can be found at item 17, and if we go back to TMO 00830598598/11. We see at paragraph 17.1.1, it says this: one area highlighted in many FRAs was the need to investigate whether flat entrance doors and enclosed blocks were sufficiently fire resisting and self-closing. In every case where the assessor could not be confident that the flat entrance door met the required fire safety standard, or where he was unable to ascertain that any glazed transoms, etc., were adequately fire rated or resistant, he highlighted these locations in the action plan. Now, the policy highlights flat entrance doors as an area for concern. Is that a fair summary?
That's correct.
Specifically, the need to investigate whether flat entrance doors were sufficiently fire resisting, first of all,
Yes.
and self-closing, secondly.
Yes.
Can you assist with how the TMO was addressing both those needs when you joined in June 2015?
My understanding was that there had been a borough-wide programme to replace flat entrance doors with fire-resistant self-closing doors in 2011, and that our policy was to check and inspect, and if necessary repair or replace both door and or self-closer when the flat was void, or we were doing major works, or the door was damaged, or in fact if the resident had raised a concern about the state of their door.
Now, can we now move on to paragraph 24 on page 14, which governs fire procedures? And it says at 24.1 this: staff who are not fully able-bodied, who may need assistance to be alerted to the fire alarm or require assistance to evacuate from the office, are required to have a personal emergency evacuation plan, PEEP. The H&S team will meet with the individual, and together they will complete a pro forma clarifying their specific evacuation procedure. In some cases, this involves the use of a lightweight evac chair and training of staff in its use. and any additional assistance they will be provided, etc. The PEEP will be reviewed on a regular basis and when the needs/ability of the individual change in any way. Now, as with the health and safety policy, there is no provision here for residents who are not fully able-bodied and who may need assistance to evacuate. Can you explain that omission?
No, I don't know why we didn't include something about that.
And as a consequence, PEEPs were not generally used for residents in general needs housing, is that right?
That's correct.
Can we now look at the fire safety strategy that was in draft form presented on the 13th of June 2017? That can be found at TMO 00873 And if we look at paragraph 2.2 on the first page, after the word residential blocks in the third line, the following words have been added, namely, on a regular basis, and that any significant findings and action plan identified in the assessment are progressed in a timely basis. Going back to my earlier question about timeliness, why were these words added?
These words were added because I was finding that things were not being completed in a timely manner. And when I arrived, there were a number of outstanding actions that had been outstanding for a very long time, up to and over 12 months.
What does timely mean here? Is it timely by reference to the risk presented by the outstanding work, or the absence of any particular measure? How's it calculated?
Each action would have a target requirement completion, and they needed to be completed within that time frame.
Now, if we can go to page 3 and item 5.1. And sorry, we see the first bullet point. But under the words action plan items, the following have been added, and regular monitoring of progress with completion by the Health and Safety Committee. Why was that added? So with completion this by the Health and Safety Committee. Are you with me? Can you see
Yeah. I'm just reading it again to get my head around it.
I'm sorry.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure is that there was somewhere where this was actually being monitored, and we had so many outstanding actions that I wasn't sure whether the Health and Safety Committee were actually monitoring the progress and ensuring the completion. So that was added as a specific item.
So that's Health and Safety Committee carrying out a monitoring function.
A monitoring of progress, yes, and completion.
Now, can we go to the fourth bullet point from the bottom? And the last sentence has been added along these lines. Additionally, the TMO's fire consultant is regularly consulted during major works and liaises with contractors, consultants, and undertakes inspection as requested. Was that a statement of fact as opposed to policy, i.e. that a fire consultant would always be consulted during major works?
The intention was that the fire consultant would be required to be consulted on major works for all of them.
And was that inserted because a fire consultant had been used on the refurbishment project of Grenfell?
It will have been partly that, but also partly the fact that we felt that any of the construction works, any of the major works that were happening, needed to have the fire consultant consulted to ensure that that he was that he could comment on any of the fire safety issues in that building due to the changes we were making.
Now, looking at the next bullet point,
Sorry, before we leave that bullet point, the way that's expressed suggests that the TMO has a standing fire consultant. Is that what was intended?
That's the fire consultant who was doing the fire risk assessments. That's who that's referring to. So it's not a TMO employee. It's the consultant that we've employed.
Who's that?
That was Carl Stokes at the time.
That's just what I wanted to know.
Okay, sorry.
and preempted my next questions. I just want to make sure you're not referring there to Exova. It's Carl Stokes.
No, that particular reference would have been Carl Stokes because it refers to the TMO's fire consultant.
Can you help us as to why that had been included in the strategy, specifically in relation to breaches in compartmentation? Was there a specific reason why it was phrased in that way?
Sorry, which we're looking at the same.
We're looking at.
The next one.
Sorry, I confused you there. The
Yep.
services of a third-party accredited specialist fire contractor have been procured.
Yes.
And this contractor can be instructed to competently undertake work on any breaches of compartmentation. Now, why was that specifically included in the strategy, and in particular, the words relating to breaches of compartmentation?
Because on inspection in some of the buildings, we had identified that there were work that was required to improve the breaches of compartmentation. And in order to do that, we needed a specialist who actually was accredited to do that piece of work.
Now, can we go next to paragraph 14.4.1 under fire FRA action plans? Page 10. Now, some of the wording in 14.41 has been updated, but the final sentence has been newly added, and it says, to assist with this, a report is submitted with a breakdown of all actions by team, and an age profile of all outstanding actions is also provided. Was that inserted because there'd been an issue regarding the completion of FRA actions by the TMO?
It was.
Now, if we can go to paragraph 15 next, the stay put, defend in place strategy, the wording of 15.1 does not appear to us, at least, to be substantially different, but there is a new subparagraph at 15.2 regarding fire action notices. And that subparagraph says this: information on fire procedures has been communicated to residents by a variety of means. Letter to new residents, information in residents' handbook, on website, articles in the Link magazine, etc. However, this is now being supported by fire action notices within the common parts of the block. A programme of fitting fire action notices so that residents, visitors and contractors are informed about the fire procedure is underway. Can you explain why that addition had been made to the strategy?
Because it had been identified in the Adair fire risk assessment. I believe it was Adair. And we had a discussion about fire action notices, and we agreed that it was appropriate to have them in every block and also on each floor.
Did you examine the letter to new residents and verify for yourself the adequacy of the information provided to new residents?
I did not.
Can we look at a statement provided to the inquiry by Daniel Lewis, who is a team administrator, then a neighbourhood coordinator from late 2016, who joined the TMO in April 2015. We can find his statement at TMO 008999762, and if we go to paragraph 8. And what he says there is this: from review of the attached welcome pack documents, I cannot see that any fire safety advice was provided to new residents, although I note in the useful contact numbers Word document that the TMO's website details were provided, and I understand that the TMO's website contained fire safety advice. The useful contact numbers Word document also provided new residents with the fire brigade's number. First of all, are you aware of the packs he's referring to here, the welcome packs?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what was in the welcome pack, but I was advised that there was a letter outlining the fire safety in relation to the new residents' particular building and the strategy. So I'm not sure whether that was in the welcome pack or whether that was at the sign-up stage.
Now, can we look at what he says about residents' handbooks? And that's at paragraph 14 of his statement over the page. Sorry, 2 pages. Thank you. He says that I have been asked by the inquiry to confirm if a resident's handbook was provided to new residents at Grenfell Tower, and if so, to confirm if the resident's handbook formed part of the welcome pack. I joined the Lancaster West office in 2016 and cannot recall that the resident's handbook was part of the welcome pack. I recall that when I joined the TMO, I was told that the resident's handbook had been a work in progress for some time and was not finalised. I do not recall that it was ever finalised after I joined the TMO. Did you check what information on fire procedures or general fire safety information was contained in the most recent version of the resident's handbook?
I'm not sure that I saw the latest version of the resident's handbook, so I can't answer that.
Well, you can say that if you never saw it,
Well, if I never saw it, I didn't check it.
Did you check whether the handbook had in fact been finalised and sent to residents?
I didn't check that, no.
Now, can we look at what he says in relation to the fire safety letter, and that's at paragraph 19. And he says this: I've been asked to confirm if TMO 008659991, being the letter from Janice Ray with the subject line "Fire Safety in Your Home," was provided to new tenants at Grenfell Tower. I cannot recall this letter being included within the welcome packs, and my team would not have been responsible for sending the letter to residents. I do not know who would have been responsible for this. Did you ever seek confirmation that the letter was in fact sent to new residents?
The only thing that I would have checked was with Janice about whether her identifying that there was a letter that was going to new residents was actually going to new residents. And I don't know how that happened because that was out of my particular area of responsibility. My understanding was they were given that at sign-up. I don't know whether the welcome pack is the same as the information that tenants were given at sign-up.
Now, can we return to the fire safety strategy itself? And if we can go to TMO 008305984/11 and paragraph 17.1.1. Now, this is the previous strategy, one we looked at earlier, I think.
Yeah.
And in the first sentence, it read, one area highlighted in many FRAs was the need to investigate whether flat entrance doors and enclosed blocks were sufficiently fire resisting and self-closing. And if we can go to the updated draft strategy, which is at TMO 00842210/10, and look at 17.1.1. So it must be over the page, apologies. It says, our fire risk assessor is required to highlight any potentially non-compliant flat entrance doors for further assessment. In addition, access permitting, he is required to assess a percentage of doors in each block to ensure that they are sufficiently fire rated and self-closing. Now, in the original strategy, the need for the TMO to investigate flat entrance doors is highlighted. In the updated draft strategy, the onus is put on the fire risk assessor to assess a percentage of doors in each block. Would you agree?
Yes.
I suppose the question that flows from that, was there a deliberate and informed change in strategy requiring the assessor to check the percentage? Or was it always the case, as you'd understood it, that the assessor was to check a percentage of doors?
I think the intention had been that the assessor, in the original documentation, that the assessor would do that. However, that wasn't clear. So what we're making sure here that it is absolutely clear what we want our fire risk assessor to do.
What, I suppose the other question that flows from this, was there any percentage of doors in each block that it would propose that the fire risk assessor should look at?
I can't remember if we had a fixed percentage. I'm sorry, I can't remember that.
Do you remember any discussions in meetings as to the extent of the sample exercise carried out by the fire risk assessor?
No, I can't remember.
Now, in the second paragraph, looking at this draft strategy, we have an excerpt of the building regulations, and below that it says this: in discussion with RBKC, it has been agreed that the TMO will embark on an inspection installation programme to ensure that entrance doors to all tenanted flats are fitted with a self-closing device. This programme will be over a period of no more than 5 years, will commence in this financial year, and will be risk-based, with the potentially higher risk properties featuring at the start of the programme. To ensure that access can be obtained to all tenanted properties to complete this installation work, an access procedure is being agreed with RBKC's legal services team in advance of the work commencing. A copy of this access procedure will be available from the TMO Health and Safety team shortly. Again, this issue of checking self-closing doors arose as a result of the Adair Tower fire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the TMO needed to carry out the inspection installation programme. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it was to be funded by RBKC over a 5-year period?
That's correct.
And the TMO were concerned about how to access properties to check whether the entrance doors did have self-closers. Is that right?
That's correct.
And hence the need to agree an access procedure with RBKC Legal Services.
Correct.
Now, can I turn to a separate and distinct but linked issue, and that's key performance indicators.
Okay.
Can we look first of all at a document from January 2016, and that can be found at TMO 100111825, which appears to set out the health and safety KPIs. Now, if I might ask you just to scan that list of the KPIs as they stood in January 2016. Mm-hmm. We see gas servicing, water quality, lightning protection annual testing, lifts, electrical again with props with valid test certificates. Would you agree none of those concern fire safety?
That's correct. That was the existing list.
And if we can look at Section 2, and if we can see all of Section 2, if that's possible. We see some additional proposed KPIs, and I can tell you which ones they are. It's 2.11, number of fires reported in a month, 2.12, number of LFB deficiency notices and number of broadly compliant letters, 2.13, enforcement notices, 2.14, percentage completion of FRAs due for review in the month, and over the page. FRA actions completed. Now, were those proposed KPIs measured from the date of this document? Was that due to be the starting point, January 2016?
That was the intention. They were, if you noticed, they were up for discussion as to whether we would include all these items in the KPIs.
We'll come on to that.
Okay.
So you can sort of assist the panel in more detail on that. But was the intention, if they were accepted, for these KPIs to start to apply from financial year 16-17?
That was correct, yes.
Do you remember now how they were to be measured? Was there much detail of the mechanisms for that?
And that was the next discussion about how and where we would find that, be able to get that information. Some of the information was relatively easy to get. Some of it would be harder, and we needed to discuss how we were going to get that information.
Now, there was an audit in 2013, which you referred to earlier in your evidence, and a follow-up in December 2013. And if we could look at the audit report first, which is at RBK quadruple 00313, and specifically what it says under recommendations in relation to KPIs on paragraph 10 on page 21. And we've looked at this, over the page with paragraph 9.3, sorry, that was my fault. We see audit noted at 9.3 that only a limited number of health and safety performance indicators are reported, and there is an absence of meaningful indicators for areas such as electrical inspections, etc. 9.4, in the absence of a full range of performance indicators for health and safety specific areas, there is a risk that management cannot monitor performance levels for these areas and take appropriate corrective action where poor or inadequate performance levels are identified. And if we look down further below that, you see in emboldened text recommendation and then management response. The recommendation is set out there. Appropriate performance indicators relating to health and safety should be developed by management. And then the management response below that says, however, it's been acknowledged that it would be beneficial for the TMO to supplement this with meaningful health and safety key performance indicators. And it says there a range of such indicators have now been identified, covering a range of areas, including health and safety inspections, fire risk assessments reviews, enforcement deficiency notices received, number of accidents, fires, violent incidents, percentage asbestos surveys completed, and then going on, percentage compliance on maintenance of fire equipment, wet and dry risers, fire extinguishers, fire alarms, sprinklers, etc. Now, looking at that, some of the performance indicators that the TMO management said were to be implemented in 2013 were being proposed as performance indicators in January 2016. Would you agree with that summary?
I would, yes.
Do you know, recognising that you only joined in June 2015,
Yes.
are you able to help us as to why nothing had been done about applying those accepted KPIs between 2013 and January 2016?
I don't know why it took so long to identify and start reporting on them.
Was the delay not a subject which was discussed when you came to consider these in January 2016?
I can't actually remember.
Could we just look at further discussion regarding these KPIs after 2016 and go to the Health and Safety Committee minutes from the 13th of June 2017? And if we can go to TMO 100-17541. Now, if the document manager wouldn't mind just scrolling through the minutes, just so Ms Matthews can familiarise herself with what was on the agenda. My central point to you, Ms Matthews, will be that there doesn't appear to be a specific KPI item on the agenda.
No.
I'd just like you to review that just to see whether that's a correct point to put to you.
No, there doesn't appear to be a specific.
I'll just let you scan it through before giving a final answer. Please tell the document manager when you want it changed to the next page.
There you can go on. Next page. There's only that section that refers to performance.
But no reference there to KPIs.
No. I don't know why that wasn't.
Well, that's my question. Do you know why there doesn't appear to be any discussion of KPIs? Looking at this is a minute, health and safety minute from the day before the fire itself.
You're correct, although I note that in the previous sections where there are sections on violent incidents and accidents, for instance, there'll be the KPI information related to that in the report that was associated. So I think the issue is we didn't have a separate, here are all the KPIs and the numbers and the reasons. We had individual reports on particular performance. So I agree there wasn't the overall picture.
I suppose I can put my point more bluntly. It appears on the face of these minutes at least that the fire safety KPIs were not monitored by the TMO following their proposed implementation in January 2016. Is that a fair summary of the position?
I'm not sure that it is because of the point I'm actually making. So again, going back through the report and the KPIs, the fire KPIs related to the fire risk assessment actions, and there was clearly a report on the performance of those because we picked that up under fire risk assessment. There was a KPI on violent incidents and accidents, and that's picked up, and the information in that particular report will have the numbers and what those cases were. In the other fire area, which was about the number of enforcement notices or the number of deficiency notices, those would get picked up in their section. So I think the issue is we didn't have a full, here's the KPI report, and then all the information against the explanation about the performance. We didn't produce it as a KPI performance document, but what we did was have separate reports on different key areas, which is what these items on the agenda are.
I put this point differently to you, but did you have specific monitoring, just looking at these minutes as illustrative of the approach taken by the TMO, specific review of KPIs, for example, in respect to fire risk assessments, enforcement deficiency notices received, fires?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes, we would in individual items on the agenda. So if there were deficiency notices, then there would be a section on enforcement and deficiency notices, and we would report on those and the appropriate actions.
Thank you. So I've come to the end of that particular topic. We are nearly at 20 past 4 rather. The next topic is fire risk assessments, which is substantial, and my preference would be not to start it at 20 past 4 this afternoon, but to start it tomorrow morning.
How are you getting on with the witness?
We are on track, and certainly to finish our evidence at the close of business tomorrow.
Within tomorrow?
Within tomorrow.
Well, I don't suppose you'd mind having a slightly early afternoon, would you?
No, I don't mind.
Ms. Williams, right. Well, I think in that case, Ms. Matthews will call a halt there, slightly on the early side, but that's all right. We'll have to ask you to come back tomorrow.
Yes.
But as you've heard from Mr. Kinnear, he is confident that you will finish your evidence tomorrow.
Thank you.
So we'll resume at 10 o'clock, please.
Yes.
And again, please remember what I said to you earlier, not
Yes.
to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it
Yes.
overnight, all right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you.
If you'd like to give the usher now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Kinnear, 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.